St. Petersburg, Russia. The year is 1903. A man of relatively short stature wanders the streets with eyes that bleed blue and facial hair darkly winding about his face. To the people he dwells among, he is a Stranik, or religious pilgrim. Little do his Russian peers know, however, soon his ascension into the Romanov family as a holy man will completely alter the Russian Tsar's regime, ending with a brutal revolution and the even more brutal murder of Grigory Rasputin. Rasputin began his life modestly as a peasant in a small town in Siberia. Early on, it was thought that he possessed powers beyond human capabilities. After spending time in a monastery, he reported that he had had a vision of God and soon after began practicing the life of a religious mystic. In 1901, Rasputin began his endeavors as a Stranik, traveling to places like Greece and Jerusalem. When he arrived in St. Petersburg in 1903, he quickly escalated to being known as a starets, or holy man, living amongst the Russian people with healing and prophetic powers. Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg at a very auspicious time. At this point, church leaders were in search of figures of his type. They wanted those with religious influence, who had power over the people. Rasputin was both an ordinary peasant, simple, forceful, and direct, while at the same time he held the power to captivate people with his healing powers and insight into the future. As Rasputin became increasingly popular for his inexplicable nature, he befriended Tsarina Alexandra's closest friend, Anya Vyryubova. Anya's devotion to Rasputin was absolute, which she reinforced after the terrible derailment of a train from Tsarskoye Selo to St. Petersburg, in which Anya was almost killed. Although she survived the accident, Anya's condition was so dreadful her doctors despaired of saving her life. Her body was so crushed and mangled. Rasputin, however, came to her bedside and stood over Anya as she lay near death. He reached out and held her hand. Dripping with sweat, intensely focused, Rasputin repeated the words, "Anushaka! Anushaka! Rise!" The drama of the moment was incredible. Anya suddenly awoke from her coma, opened her eyes, and tried to rise from her bed. It was a miracle. As Rasputin staggered into the next room, he spoke, prophetically, saying that although she would live, for the rest of her life Anya would be a cripple. News of this supposed miracle quickly spread throughout St. Petersburg. Anya, especially, began praising the healing powers of Rasputin to the Tsarina. The Tsarina noted this because of her son Alexei and his struggle with hemophilia, a genetic disease where blood does not clot properly, triggering intense and prolonged bleeding. The church leaders as well informed the Tsar Nicholas II, the official head of the Orthodox Church, about this mysterious monk who had brought Anya back to the world of the living. They boasted of his claims of being a prophet. The Tsar also tucked this in the back of his mind because of the suffering of his son. In October 1912, Alexei's hemophilia escalated to the point of non-stop bleeding for a week and a half because of an injury he had sustained. The Tsarina, now desperate, sent a telegram to the mad monk explaining the situation in hopes that Rasputin could intervene. When Rasputin's response arrived at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo near St. Petersburg, it stated that the bleeding would stop and the child would not die. Soon after, Alexei's bleeding finally subsided.
God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Fear not, the child will not die.
The Tsarina was convinced that Rasputin had saved her son. It took little time for Rasputin to become a regular fixture in the royal palace. He became the solution to Tsarina's hysteria in regards to Alexei. Tsar Nicholas II once wrote that the Tsarina was rather tired because of Alexei's illness. But now Rasputin was able to regularly manage Alexei's disease, which added more to his popularity as a prophetic healer. But the Russian people did not ignore his other malicious attributes. Rasputin's life in St. Petersburg, though based on Tsarevich's need, was not totally centered on the Romanov family. He remained an accessible holy monk and healer, with his days consisting of a leisurely breakfast with family and close friends. Between 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., he had calling hours, open to any St. Petersburg citizen. Later in the afternoon, he called Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, the family's favorite residence, for the family's news. He only went to the palace when he was needed for healing or spiritual support. But Rasputin's lifestyle was not as pure as his believed healing powers. He lived a sexually charged lifestyle, indulging in alcohol regularly, especially vodka. The name Rasputin translates literally to the debauched one, and he actually did not receive this name until his life was highlighted in the public sector. He was accused by many of the Tsarist family friends as a man of misdeeds. His sexual intrigues were numerous, as it was known that he would sleep with the upper-class women in exchange for granting him political favors. But he was also accused of going as far as raping a nun. As Rasputin became increasingly known, so did his views, much to the dismay of the Russian Orthodox Church. Like many spiritually minded Russians, Rasputin spoke of salvation as depending less on the clergy and the church than on seeking the Spirit of God within. He also maintained that sin and repentance were independent and necessary to salvation. Interdependent? Were interdependent. He also maintained that sin and repentance were interdependent and necessary to salvation. Thus, he claimed that yielding to temptation, and for him personally, this meant sex and alcohol, even for the purposes of humiliation, so as to dispel the sin of vanity, was needed to proceed to repentance and salvation. Church leaders were no longer in desire of his direct control over the people, but rather sought to remove him from a position of power. The Mad Monk did not only maintain a tense relationship with the Russian Orthodox Church, but the beginning of World War I brought about changes in the Romanov family